Hey everybody, it's Milton Davis from MV Media, and welcome to 11 Questions Special Edition. I am honored and very happy to be interviewing Minister Faust, the author of the recently re-released The Alchemist of Kush. And I'm fanboying on this one, y'all, because I remember Minister Faust from back in the day when I was first starting to read science fiction and fantasy, and he was one of the few people that was out here, doing this thing and blazing trails and stuff. I had a chance to read The Alchemist of Kush, and it blew me away. I'm like, man, this is a serious book. And then had the honor to be able to publish a couple of his short stories within some of the anthologies that we were able to edit, like Griot's Sisters of the Spirit and Cyberpunk. So to be able to sit here and talk to him, I guess as a peer, as opposed of otherwise, it's really honoring me. So welcome, Minister Faust.
Well, thank you, Brother Milton Davis. And I mean, the honor is all mine. As I was saying before we started rolling, I mean, you are really the major exemplar for all of us in terms of like continually pumping out awesome fiction, as well as an editor, putting out book after book, promoting other people's works. There are people who they are only trying to build their own careers. And brothers like you set a magnificent example of, this work of our great Afrocentric movement and civilization means lifting each other up. So you do that constantly. And I see that in your Facebook feed as you're constantly promoting other people. So, the honor is mine. And I am just very grateful that you were willing to reissue The Alchemist of Kush. And, if you somehow manage, I know that you are an advanced chemist. If you could somehow create, Miltonium, and we could just start getting injections, we could just have world peace immediately.
Well, enjoy it while you can. it's getting close to that time, but that's another conversation. But I want to start out by reading your bio. It's varied and it's interesting. And after people hear this bio, they're going to ask themselves, if they haven't heard of you before, if they're part of that minority of people who've never heard of you and your work, they will be questioning their existence that they don't know. But here we go. According to the Routledge Companion to Literature and Science, since the 1960s, Afro-diasporic authors, including Samuel R. Delany, Octavia E. Butler, Nalo Hopkinson, and Minister Faust, have become luminaries within the sci-fi community. The critically acclaimed author of The Alchemist of Kush and the Kindred Award-winning and Philip K. Dick runner-up, Shrinking the Heroes, Minister Faust first won accolades for his debut, The Coyote Kings of the Space Age Bachelor Pad, shortlisted for the Locust Best First Novel and Philip K. Dick Awards. Mrs. Faust's short stories have appeared in Cyberworld, Edmonton on Location, Fiery Spirits, Griot's A Sword and Soul Anthology, Mothership, Tales of Afrofuturism and Beyond, Cyberpunk, and elsewhere. IO9, Adventure Rocket Ship, Canada 150, Short Stories of Reconciliation Connecting Us All, Engineer Magazine, The Globe and Mail, Greg Tate's Coon Business, and more have published his articles. Mrs. Faust's I knew I was going to do this. Afrotopianism draws from myriad ancient African civilizations, explores present realities, and imagines a future in which people struggle not only for justice, but for the stars. And that's the short bio. But I'm going to jump right into this and just start off with questions like this. What led you to write science fiction? I mean, what was the impetus of that?
When I was 4 or 5, so before I could read, I was on my mom's knee, literally on my mom's lap, and she was reading Robert Heinlein's Red Planet. And my mom had read science fiction as an Alberta farm girl since, as early as she could get it, maybe even in the 1940s. I'm not sure why she was reading Red Planet at that exact time, because this was the 70s. But, reading it, I got to hear about these, what it would be like to be on another planet. And then, of course, watching Star Trek, not in its first run, but in its, this is the early 70s, its early reruns, seeing Star Wars when it first came out, and reading Marvel Comics, of course. And so what I saw was amazing worlds with people doing remarkable things, just absolutely exciting. Because of the way it was all done at the time, I didn't appreciate early on just how much that the people who made that material seemed to think that we as Africans would not exist. I mean, we're 1/6 of the human race, and they had essentially committed literary genocide by removing us from the future. And, sometimes I hear people say things like, well, there'll be space for us in the future, or, we'll have a place. It's like, no, we are going to create the future. And the way that we're going to create that future is first through imagination. Our science fiction is our most optimistic way of framing for all of our family the kind of worlds that we want to create. Now, I will say that I've written my share of downbeat science fiction and gloomy stuff, and some stuff that is not quite dystopian, but is certainly grim. And so I'm really now moving towards trying to create a far more optimistic vision, because that's what we need. And critically, it was absolutely important for me that our work, there's a variety of terms for the work that we're doing, but for me, Afrocentric science fiction, I call it Afrotopianism, because it's about creating the world that we want. And that term Afrofuturism, which we didn't create, it was a non-African who created the term, that you'll notice right in the word futurism, it seems to suggest that we should ignore our past and ignore our present. But what we absolutely want to do is recover the memories of 5,000 years of our civilizations that the people who destroyed or attempted to destroy us intentionally suppressed. Some of us think our history is only 500 years old. Our job is to expose that it's more than 5,000 years old of civilizations, which are ongoing. And when we have all these things together, we can envisage what we really want for our future. And Africans of all nations from across the planet, whether they are Nigerians, Somalis, South Africans, or they are Americans, Jamaicans, and Brazilians, or in my case, African Canadians, we can see ourselves as part of one super African family and build that future we want together. And that's why I write Afrotopianism.
And it shows in your work as well. I really like the energy in your work as well. It kind of, when I first read some of your work, I was like, this is kind of like science fiction hip hop in a way. I mean, there was a rhythm to your prose and an energy to it that reminded me a lot of that, like that whole. I'm gonna be more specific. That '90s hip hop music, and almost like it was being interpreted into this particular genre and stuff. And that's why I enjoy so much about your work and your writing. But let's get a little bit more specific. Let's talk about the Alchemist of Kush, because I know that it combines, I say, a couple of your loves. It actually it does a good job at combining, like you say, the present and the past, in particular with these two main characters. So tell us, give us your synopsis of the novel.
Sure. And I just want to say, first of all, thanks for the kind words. And also, as far as that sort of prose style, there is a brother who I believe his work appears in some of your anthologies, and that's Zigzag Claiborne. Oh, and yeah, his work is it's outstanding. His craft of language is so magnificent. His amazing world building is fascinating, enduring characters. And so, I hope that folks like my stuff, but if you like my stuff, you're going to love Zigzag's work. So please check it out. Okay.
Yeah. Zigzag is one of my favorite authors. I mean, I'm always impressed with authors that write in a way that I know I can't write. So people like you and Zigzag and Eugene Bacon, and I read this, I'm like, oh my God, let me just sit back and just bask in this, that kind of thing.
I have that experience a lot, and it's nice seeing work. But as I said, I love your work, and I've just gotten the sequel to Amber in the Hidden City, and so it's Amber and the Enchanted Sword.
Yep, that's it.
And so I can't wait to dig into that. I'm just finishing some deadlines. But yeah, when you see people doing awesome stuff that you yourself couldn't do, it's not a feeling of jealousy. It's more of it's a feeling of excitement that it's like we're on a superhero team. We all have our own unique powers, But to answer your question, The Alchemist of Kush is the story of, to use a term that was really used a lot maybe a decade and a half ago, it's the story of a couple of child soldiers or lost boys, and they're both from somewhere along the River Nile. Both of them were boys who, because of war, were separated from their fathers, who were killed, and separated from their mothers, and then fell under the tutelage of a powerful, dominant man who would tell them the secret knowledge that they needed to change themselves in the world. And one of them lives in contemporary Edmonton, in the neighborhood called Kush, named after the ancient civilization. And his name is Raphael Garang. And the other one is named Hru, better known maybe by the Greek name of Horus, son of Osiris, or probably Hru, son of Usir. So they're separated by 7,000 years of history, but their lives are remarkably connected by enduring and eternal facts about who all human beings are. And I wanted to come up with a way to make, ancient Kemetic history, mythology, and it's the meanings of its stories, the central creation myth, come alive. Because, if you go to school in North America or anywhere where Europeans have colonized, you'll get a lot of particularly Greek mythology. You might also get some Norse mythology. And look, I grew up loving that. I still love it. I'm sure you do too.
Yeah.
Thor was, I think, one of the very first comics I read, and it just happened to be an accounting of the origins of the Norse universe. So I grew up loving all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
When you study those things, you get fascinating insights into your past, but what you don't know, if there has been an active attempt to deny you access to your own founding ideas, mythologies, histories, and so forth, is that there's part of you missing. And when you encounter that, it's inspiring, it's liberating, it's uplifting. So I wanted to be able to give those things to our peoples who are here or wherever they might read my books.
Yeah, it was fascinating to me because I knew because the fact that the situation with the Lost Boys of Sudan and what they went through was something that was on the news, and there's been movies made about it after the fact that I've read your book.
Mm-hmm.
But the part of Horus and that part of it was something that I wasn't really that familiar with, and what he went through, and the fact that you were able to see the parallels in those situations and bring them together in the story. And what do you see the strength or the telling the story the way you told it? You could have told it, could have just talked about the experience of Raphael or the experience of Horus, but to combine them and tell them parallel like that, I think it was the book of then and the book of now.
Right.
Talk a little bit about that, because that was really fascinating to me.
Well, thanks. Well, I always try to set myself some sort of challenge when I'm writing a new novel manuscript, and I figure that if it's not scaring me a little bit, or even maybe demoralizing me when I get to the middle and I go like, I think I'm never going to finish this, or it's a disaster, or everyone will hate it, it means that I'm not trying hard enough. So I need to set myself those difficult challenges. And I hadn't ever told a story, the book-length story that was set in two different time periods. And I wanted to see how I could do that. And I also wanted to add a third element, which is that, when I was taking my English degree, one course I had, it was a secular course, but it was on the King James Bible as literature. And, I grew up as a Catholic, and I was very familiar with the New Testament, but I was really not very familiar with, the Tanakh, the Pentateuch, the various terms that we use to describe the origin, the Hebrew Bible. And so I read in class, we read the story of Noah. And, we all knew Noah, like everybody knew the story of Noah from cartoons and movies and jokes and all that kind of stuff, comedy albums. And then I read it, and I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, this story is barely a page and a half. It was like, I was shocked that here was this thing that had been so significant to people who were parts of Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and the Baha'i faith. And, that's like, two-thirds, at least like a third of humanity right there. Mm-hmm. And here's this story, which is like barely exists. And so what was fascinating to me is how much a story retold, because the story probably goes back to maybe around 800 before the Common Era. We have stories that are far, far older, right? Mm-hmm. So what does it mean if you can take a story and magnify it that much, it can help shape people's lives? So I was excited to think like, well, what if there was a similar kind of a scripture that was either an ancient text or it was a text created in the modern world that would matter to a subculture, the alchemists who were in this book. And so, you have the Book of Then, which is Haru telling the story from, first person narration as it's, in a sense, talking like a contemporary person. People should like the type of fantasy writing that they like, but I myself have a difficult time getting into the type of writing that I call forsooth my lady type of writing. And that doesn't mean, I'm not slamming it. Like, that's perfectly legit. I grew up loving Thor comics and it was all like that, but it's just tough for me now. I like the stuff that makes people seem like they're identifiable. Like you could go back in time and you would still have all the same core needs and drives. And then, and then there'd be this modern story where characters like Raphael would be familiar with this text that is based on what the real Haru, if there was a real one, had lived through, but it would be so remote in that language that, like King James biblical language, it would really lose the essential grit and humanity of the people. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if you could compare, like, this is a scriptural reading, but this is what it meant actually to live through those things. So you get like one sentence that says like, and then he went to this city where there was suffering or something like that. But then when you see that play out and it's horrible and frightening and devastating and traumatic, and then you realize like, wow, these stories, it's the silence in the stories that is much more of the story than the story.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now I'm gonna ask you this next question from a reader point of view. I was very fascinated by the detail that you went into with the relationship between Raphael and his mentor. Not so much the relationship, but the steps that his mentor laid out to make him this man that he was going to become. And the question that I have, is that, I mean, was this something that was from maybe based on something that, was actually an actual educational process that you came across? Or was this like out of your head? Because I mean, a lot of what we do as authors, we base it on stuff that we read, and it was just so detailed, and it made just so much sense to me. And I was like, is this an actual educational text?
Well, thanks for asking that question. In fact, I think you're the first person who's asked me about that since the book came out. And, probably like a lot of people from let's say, who are in Generation X, or as I prefer to say, Generation Malcolm X, if we were hip hop fans, we were inevitably exposed to the culture of what insiders call the Nation of Gods and Earths, or what outsiders would call the 5%ers, or the 5% Nation of Islam. Okay. And we would hear it through, Rakim albums, or Eric B. and Rakim when they were together. We would hear it through a huge range of other hip hop artists, Poor Righteous Teachers. But it was always sort of like, like, what are they talking about? Because they're intentionally talking in a code. So back in the days when the internet was Usenet, for people who remember that, there were groups, which was like bulletin boards. There's no text. There's no pictures. There's no video. It's just text. I remember coming across groups like Soak Culture, African American, and other groups, and learning about the 5%ers, and then learning, bits and pieces from articles. There was no internet that we could use to rapidly discover things, and there was, to the best of my knowledge, no books that dealt with the 5% Nation at that time. So I would find out little bits and pieces, and then in the 2000s, started to learn more, and thinking like, it's a fascinating way. I mean, I guess the term that will be familiar to a lot of people is they employ a catechism. They wouldn't call it that, but just like Freemasons, this is not going to turn into one of those weird conversations where I talk about Freemasons controlling anything. I mean, it's a fraternal organization, and there are lots of them. Like there are Elks and I don't know, a bunch of others, right? Oddfellas and Rebecca's. I mean, it's crazy the number of names of these organizations. So a catechism is a call and response. The teacher asks a question, which is a set question, and the learner has a set answer. And it's true that as a teacher, I don't employ that style, but I will say it's useful if you want everybody quickly to have a certain body of knowledge. The real question is, do you learn to analyze that knowledge? as opposed to just spit it out. And one thing that's interesting in the five percenters is that they employ a numerological system, and I'm not endorsing or denouncing any of this. I'm just describing a numerological technique where they'll take a number or the numbers, how the letters add up numerologically, et cetera, and they'll use those because each number has a meaning from like 0 to 9 to try to discuss their experiences of the day or the experience of some historical event. In other words, they are harnessing the power of random associations in order to derive meaning. And that's as legitimate a way of trying to develop oneself and advance oneself and one's culture as any other. You know, if you break down any religion, you know, this is going to sound like I'm mocking people's religion, and I am not. I'm talking now as a writer. Like when religions last 100 years or a few hundred or a few thousand, they're like the world's biggest fan communities imaginable. And if you think of all the web pages that people put together and the cons that people put together in science fiction fandom, it's awesome. There's whole wikis on shows and whatnot. Like that can't hold a candle to what people have done inside of religion. I mean, where they build buildings and they sometimes go to war and other times do great works of decency and justice for humanity, and on it goes. So I just find when I was looking at the five percenters, it was so exciting to see the things that they had done well and the richness of this culture that had sprung up in the early 1960s as one man, later on known as Allah and eventually as Father Allah, had been exiled from the Nation of Islam and then created a fascinating subculture, you know, primarily in New York City, but then it spread outward. And so, you know, I wanted to make an allegory that would in part deal with that as well. So it was fascinating. And you know, there were some wonderful people, including a brother named Saladin Kwana, who was, you know, very helpful, thoughtful in answering some of my questions, and others that I interviewed and books that I read. And I would just say, bottom line is, if anybody wants to get ahead, they should just take any one thing super seriously. And if you do that, it will lead you to all, you know, as long as it's not like crazy insanity stuff like QAnon and anti-masking and all that. Don't do that. I mean, compassionate, constructive things like study chemistry.
Well, one of this we're gonna leave some for people to read the book. I just wanted there's some insight I wanted to get there, but yeah, we want, you know, I think this would be a lot to kind of give some people incentive to say, hey, what's this book all about, and take a look at it. But one thing I can say is that you're the first author that I published that designed and did their own cover. And that was an aspect of your talent that I wasn't aware of. And a lot of people might not know that you are a Renaissance man. You do a lot of different things. And so the inspiration of the art on the cover, where did that come from?
Well, thank you. I appreciate the compliment. And I do love, I love making art. And my first ambition was to be a comic book artist. I mean, my first serious ambition. And I spent about 10 years trying to move in that direction. And I am actually working on a graphic novel right now. But, you know, so the book, you know, and maybe when your son edits this, he'll want to show the front and then the back of the book. On the front of the book, you have Haru wearing, you know, pharaonic clothing. But you know, the element that is discordant is he's got contemporary sunglasses.
Yeah.
And then on the back, you see Raphael, and he's wearing a hooded sweatshirt with a crest from his organization, the Street Falcons. It says, you know, in the name of the Falcon. And he's got also sunglasses, and the poses, if you open up the cover, are exactly mirrored because, of course, their lives are parallel. Mm-hmm. But there's a little micro detail, which is that if you look at Raphael's sunglasses, you will see reflected in them the pyramids of Nubia or Meroe, which are the image you see right behind my head. And if you look at Haru's, who should be from 7,000 years ago, reflected in his sunglasses is an image of a massive lightning storm from contemporary downtown Edmonton. So he's seeing the future and Raphael is seeing the past.
Oh man, yeah, that's nice right there. And I didn't even notice that. Now I got to go back and look at the copy, which I can't look at now because I sold all my books. But
That is good to hear.
yeah, that's a good thing because
Yes.
some coming in. But hey, we want to wrap this up. I want to just give everybody a chance to meet you and talk about the book. And just want to ask you a last question. What's some of your future projects that you got coming up right now?
Well, thank you for asking. Well, I mean, so I'm working on a graphic novel of The Coyote Kings, which was my very first novel. Very excited about that. Also working on a teleplay. There's an opportunity that has opened up, so I'm going to see if I can make some magic happen that way. I mean, I'm not going to hold my breath on that one, but always, you have so many, as people call them, IPs. You have so much intellectual property yourself that if you'll either make it or somebody else will come to you, but either way, once you get that ball rolling, you'll have so much IP behind it that you'll just be a one-man MCU, so and that's part of what I'm trying to do. I'm also working on a very large educational project that will create lesson plans and unit plans for teachers anywhere in the world to teach aspirational Afrocentric content in every subject, including terrific books such as Amber and the Hidden City. And the reason why it is so important that we do that is there are people who are teaching content that is about us, but it's not by us. And it is also, even sometimes when it's by us, it is definitely not aspirational. So you have people who want to tell our story as if it is nothing but 500 unbroken years of misery. And I'll tell you this, that never inspired anybody towards greatness. What inspires you towards greatness is seeing images of yourself that make you happy, excited, proud, and most of all, curious, so that you will investigate. And so when we break free of this trap of thinking that our history is 500 years old instead of at least 5,000 years old, and we see the glory that is there, we get inspired early. We get inspired to, just as the movie Black Panther demonstrated, that there were millions of Africans right here in North America who flooded movie theaters wearing continental clothing. And maybe for some of them, for the first time in their lives, using the word African to describe themselves. So that is a beautiful, beautiful thing. And that's part of what I want to be able to do, through whether it's through fiction or whether it's through educational materials. And of course, another major project is just trying to somehow read more of your books, because I just can't believe the size of your output is so astonishing to me. So, just being able to be inspired by people like you, Balogun, Ojetade, Zigzag Claiborne, and Nalo Hopkinson, and so many other people doing outstanding work.
Yeah, so we're going to put on here your website so people can get in contact with you. Thank you so much for giving us this time to talk to you and answer some questions, answer some of our 11 questions. Like I said before, The Alchemist of Kush is now available. You can purchase it directly from MV Media, or you can get it anywhere books are sold. It's an amazing book. If it's your introduction to Minister Faust's work, it's a great introduction. And don't let it stop there. Go on and check out the rest of the stuff that he has out there. You'll enjoy it. If you're not already a fan, you will be a fan. So that's it for 11 questions. Again, thank you, Minister Faust, for being with us, and thank everybody for checking out this video. And we'll talk to you guys again soon. Take care. Peace.
Thank you.